Do you think it's possible to love someone more than your own life, even if you met them by accident? That question haunted Ethan Calloway in a way no boardroom ever could. It wasn't theoretical, it was a storm brewing deep in his chest, because somewhere between the marble floors of a skyscraper and the quiet corners of his penthouse, a 6-year-old girl with bruises on her arms and silence in her eyes had shattered everything he thought he knew about love, control, and responsibility. She hadn't asked to be rescued. She hadn't begged to be seen. But she looked at him that night, scrubbing his office floor like it was her last chance to exist, and something inside him broke. And now they were standing on the edge of something terrifying. A courtroom, a decision, a future that could be rewritten or erased by someone who didn't know them. He'd faced powerful men, closed billion-dollar deals, walked through fire for less. But nothing, not even all the money in Manhattan, had ever made him feel this helpless. And if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I promise you'll witness the one moment that changed everything for him and for her. Ethan Calloway wasn't expecting anyone to be in his office that night, especially not a child. The 31st floor of Calloway Ventures had already gone dark, the city of Manhattan shimmering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like a dream in motion. It was nearly midnight when the elevator doors opened, and Ethan stepped out, tie loosened phone in hand, reading an email he didn't care about. He moved through the hallway without looking up, planning only to grab a document from his office before heading back to his empty penthouse. But the moment he opened the glass door to his corner office, his entire world tilted. There by the windows, hunched over the glossy tile, was a little girl no taller than his desk. She was on her knees, scrubbing the floor with both hands in oversized yellow rubber gloves. Her tiny frame shook with effort, but she didn't stop. A small plastic bucket of murky water sat beside her, sloshing every time she dipped the sponge. She hadn't heard him come in. He stared frozen. "Hey," Ethan said, sharper than he meant to. The girl jumped and spun around, eyes wide. Her hair was tied in a messy braid, and her cheeks were smudged with dirt. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Even more disturbing, her arms, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of her jumpsuit, were bruised. Not fresh, but old, yellowing, and layered. He blinked, thinking maybe his exhaustion was playing tricks. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The girl swallowed. "I'm cleaning." You're a child," he said, stepping closer. "You shouldn't even be in this building." She didn't flinch. "My aunt works here. I help her, and she let you come alone. She says I have to earn my place. If I work hard, I can stay in the apartment." His jaw clenched. The girl's voice was calm, too calm. That kind of stillness didn't belong to a child. It belonged to someone who had learned the cost of making noise. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Lila," she whispered. "Lila Bennett." He felt a name attach itself to something inside him. Bennett. That meant nothing. But Lila, she looked like she'd been folded in on herself for years. "And where's your aunt now?" "She's cleaning other floors. She says I'm too slow." His eyes scanned her again, and that's when he noticed it. Her hands were raw beneath the gloves. The bruises on her arms weren't accidental. And when she shifted, a wince flickered across her face. Something inside Ethan cracked. He stood, pulled out his phone, and called security. "I need someone from staff services up here. Now, don't ask questions." As he hung up, Lila had returned to scrubbing the floor. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "If I stop, she gets mad." 1,000 thoughts rushed through his head. Liability, protocol, child protective services, news headlines. But louder than all of that was a single truth: this girl was in pain, and no one was coming for her. When security arrived, Ethan had already found the aunt's name on the after-hours log. Her dismissal was immediate. Ethan didn't want to hear a word of excuse. She had left a 6-year-old alone in a corporate tower, bruised and scared. That was enough. "What should we do with the girl, sir?" the head of security asked. Ethan looked at Lila, now sitting on the floor with her sponge still in hand, her eyes wide with exhaustion. "She's not going to a shelter," he said firmly. "She's coming with me." Even the guards looked surprised. "Sir, I said she's coming with me." It was reckless, wild, entirely out of character. Ethan Calloway didn't make impulsive decisions. He calculated everything, but not tonight. In the back seat of his car, Lila didn't ask where they were going. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her reflection trembling in the rain-soaked window. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't anything. Just empty. Ethan watched her from the corner of his eye, wondering what he had just done. He had built an empire from the ground up, outwitted billionaires, survived betrayal. And yet this tiny bruised child had unmade him in less than 5 minutes. When they reached his penthouse, Lila followed him without question. She moved through the marble foyer like a ghost leaving no mark. He led her to the guest room, the one he hadn't used in years, and turned on the light. "This will be your room for now," he said, not sure how to talk to someone that small. "If you need anything, I'll be across the hall." She walked in silently, sat on the edge of the bed, and folded her hands again. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and closed the door, but he didn't sleep. Instead, he stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, pouring himself a drink he never touched. What the hell had just happened? Who lets a child fall that far through the cracks? Hours later, the sound of something falling in the hallway startled him. He rushed out. Lila was collapsed against the wall, unconscious. Ethan rushed to her side and lifted her. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. The doctor came quickly. Dehydration, malnourishment, overworked. The bruises, the fatigue, they all added up to something Ethan didn't want to admit. She'd been abused. Badly. When the doctor asked where her parents were, Ethan only said, "Her mother died. That's all I know." He didn't mention the bruises. Not yet. If he did, she'd be ripped away and thrown into a system that had failed him once too. As he sat beside her bed that night, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, something locked into place. A thought he couldn't shake. She doesn't belong in a file. She belongs somewhere safe. And maybe he could be that place. And you? What would you have done if you found a child like Lila in the dark? Would you walk away or change everything for her? If this story has touched your heart, we'd be grateful if you left a heart for this video. The next morning arrived like a slow breath after a sleepless night. Ethan Calloway was already in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled a pan of eggs, sizzling unconvincingly on the stove. The smell was off, too much butter maybe, but he didn't care. He wasn't cooking for critics. He was cooking for her. From down the hall, he heard the soft, hesitant shuffle of small feet across the hardwood floor. He turned just in time to see Lila Bennett step quietly into the room. She wore the same blue jumpsuit from the night before, though her face had been washed and her hair retied into a neater braid. Her expression was unreadable. "Good morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. She nodded. "Morning. You hungry?" She hesitated like it was a trap. "I already had a banana." "That's not breakfast," he replied, gesturing to the bar stool. "Come sit." She obeyed without a word. As he plated the scrambled eggs, he couldn't help but glance over at her small frame, her careful posture, the way her hands never strayed from her lap. She didn't look around, didn't fidget, didn't ask questions. She simply existed. "Here you go," he said, setting the plate in front of her. "Thank you." He expected her to devour the food like someone starved, but she didn't. She ate slowly, properly, chewing with care, like she'd been taught never to waste anything. He sat across from her and watched more than he should have, trying to decipher the silence between them. "I can do the dishes," after she said softly. "You don't have to do anything today." She blinked. "Then what do I do?" He didn't have an answer. Not yet. Later that morning, as Ethan scrolled through emails, he couldn't bring himself to care about his phone buzzed. It was a security update. A report had been filed anonymously to Child Services. Someone in the building must have seen him leaving with Lila. Maybe the aunt, maybe a nosy neighbor. Didn't matter. His stomach dropped. He called his lawyer immediately. "I need emergency guardianship procedures. Today." "You realize this won't be easy," his attorney said. "You're a single man with no parental background. If this gets public, they'll tear you apart." "I don't care," Ethan said. "Just tell me what to do." He hung up and turned to find Lila standing in the doorway, hugging a stuffed animal Marta must have left. She didn't speak, but her eyes were sharp. "You're quiet today," she said like she already knew. "I've just got a lot on my mind." She tilted her head. "Because of me?" "No," he said, maybe too quickly. "Because of the system and how broken it is." She nodded. then climbed up onto the couch and pulled her knees to her chest, arms wrapped around them like armor. After a long silence, she asked, "Do you think they'll make me leave?" Ethan swallowed. "I'm doing everything I can to make sure they don't." "That's not a yes." "I know." Her eyes dropped to her knees. "If I have to go, I'll try to be small again. That way nobody gets mad." The words landed like a stone in his gut. He walked over, sat beside her, and spoke slowly, deliberately. "No one should ever have to earn safety. You hear me? Not you. Not any kid." Lila didn't respond, but he felt the shift, the small tremble in her breath, the way her shoulder brushed against his sleeve, and didn't pull away. That night while she slept, Ethan wandered into his private storage room, somewhere he hadn't been in years. He dug through old boxes until he found a faded file labeled Ethan Callaway, Orphan Services. He sat on the cold floor flipping through pages he'd long tried to forget, notes from social workers, failed placements, the words unattached and emotionally distant scribbled in red ink. He read about himself like he was reading about a stranger. But then he closed the folder and realized something terrifying. Lila's file was being written now, and he was the only one who could stop it from being just like his. The next morning, the doorbell rang at exactly 9:00 a.m. A woman stood outside, shoulders squared, clipboard in hand, smile nowhere in sight. "Ms. Davidson, Department of Family Services." Ethan called Lila into the room. She walked in slowly, clutching the same stuffed animal as before. Her face was pale but composed. Too composed. The interview was brief. "Where did you live before my aunt's apartment? Did anyone ever hurt you?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. Do you feel safe here?" A pause. "Yes." "And what if you had to leave again?" She looked down. Her voice was almost a whisper. "I'd try not to be a problem." That was the moment Ethan knew. He'd burn down the entire process if he had to. After Ms. Davidson left, Ethan called his lawyer again. "Move faster. I want everything ready before they even consider taking her." Understood, but legal papers weren't enough. Not to her. That evening, he found her coloring quietly at the kitchen table. He sat beside her. "There's a hearing coming up," he said gently. "Soon." She didn't look up. "Are they going to take me away? I won't let them." "What if they try?" He didn't hesitate, even then. That night, Lila slipped into his office doorway and whispered, "If they don't let me stay, will you still think about me?" He walked over, knelt down to her level, and took her hand. "There isn't a version of my life where I forget you." And in that moment, Ethan Callaway, who had built skyscrapers, survived corporate wars, and spent years hiding behind glass walls, realized he was no longer building empires. He was building a promise. And if you had to fight the system for a child you barely knew but couldn't live without, how far would you go? Would you risk everything to keep that promise? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if this story moved you, please consider giving it a heart. Spring arrived slowly, like the city itself had taken a deep breath and decided to thaw. The trees lining Central Park burst into soft pinks and greens, and the cold air began to retreat from the streets of Manhattan. Inside his penthouse, Ethan Callaway stood at the window watching the world renew itself. But his focus wasn't on the skyline or the season. It was on the little girl sitting at the kitchen table, bent over a drawing of two people holding hands beneath a tall building. "Is that us?" he asked, walking over. Lila Bennett nodded without looking up. "It's the night you found me." He smiled softly. "I remember." But even as they built routines and laughter began to live in the corners of his home, the fear hadn't left. The guardianship hearing was coming, and with it the risk that everything could still be taken from them. Ethan had faced hostile takeovers, courtrooms, and investors who would have sold their souls for a decimal point. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was Lila, and no spreadsheet could tell her story. 3 nights before the hearing, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his office staring at the draft of a personal statement his attorney said the judge might consider. It was polished, precise, emotionally neutral, and completely useless. So he pushed it aside and opened a blank page. Not for the court, for her. He wrote about the moment he saw her on the office floor, the bruises, the silence, the strength in her eyes that night. He wrote about how she never asked for anything but gave everything, how she had changed him not all at once, but quietly, in the spaces where he didn't know he could still feel. He ended with a single line, "I didn't save her. She saved me." The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray. Lila wore a dark green dress and the silver bracelet he'd given her the night before, her initials engraved on the inside. She held his hand the entire drive to the courthouse, her grip firm and small. Neither of them spoke. The courtroom wasn't grand. No jury, no cameras. Just a judge, a caseworker, a legal guardian, and two people who had crossed something immeasurable together. Ethan answered every question clearly about finances, stability, education plans. But the most important question wasn't for him. Lila, the judge, said gently, "Can you tell me in your own words where you'd like to live?" The room went still. Lila looked down at her shoes, then at the bracelet on her wrist, then at Ethan. "When I was alone," she said, her voice small but steady, "I didn't feel real. But when he talks to me, I feel like I exist, like I matter, and I never want to go back to not mattering." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't look away. She squeezed his hand, and this time he squeezed back. The judge paused, then nodded slowly. "This court grants permanent legal guardianship to Mr. Ethan Callaway with all associated rights and responsibilities." No applause, no music. Just a simple truth landing quietly, like the closing of a wound. Outside the courthouse, Ethan lifted Lila into his arms. "Is it okay," she whispered against his shoulder, "that it still doesn't feel real?" He held her closer. "It feels real to me, every second." In the weeks that followed, life didn't go back to what it had been. It became something entirely new. Lila laughed more. She started leaving her drawings out on the coffee table instead of tucking them away. She called Ethan's name when she had a bad dream. She stopped checking the lock on her door 3 times before bed. One morning, she asked him a question he hadn't prepared for. "Can we help other kids like me?" He paused, then nodded. "We can try." They purchased a rundown school building in Brooklyn and together began to turn it into a sanctuary, a center for kids who had been hurt, abandoned, or overlooked. Lila named it herself the Bennett House. She visited the site often, picking out colors for the reading rooms, choosing the first books, even meeting with the volunteers. At the opening, there were no photographers, just a quiet gathering of people who cared. Lila gave the first tour. She walked small groups of children through the halls, showing them where they could paint red or just sit and feel safe. At the end, she stood before them and said, "I know what it feels like to be nobody, but this place is for people who need to remember there's somebody." Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, Ethan and Lila sat on the front steps of the Bennett house, eating melting ice cream from paper cups. "I think we made something good," she said, leaning against his arm. Ethan looked down at her. "We didn't just make something." She turned to him. "We made each other." She smiled and closed her eyes. And for the first time in either of their lives, the word forever didn't feel like something meant for other people. It felt like home. Now that you've seen how far this journey has come, what would you have done if you were in Ethan's shoes? Would you have risked your life as you knew it for a child you barely knew? Or would fear have stopped you? And if you were, Lila, would you trust someone new? After being failed so many times before, how do you feel about this story? Did it move you? Did it leave something behind in your heart? Thank you so much for listening and walking this journey with us. If you truly felt something, comment note 3 below. Comment number 2 if it was okay, and number 1 if you feel there's something we could have done better. Tell us what country you're watching from. We love hearing where our stories reach. And don't forget to leave a heart, and share this video with someone who believes in second chances. We'll see you in the next story, one that will move you just as deeply.